In today's video, I'm going to show you how I go about constructing and designing my animatics, specifically on this illustration here. This will be a step-by-step guide on how I achieve this effect. And at the end of the video, I will also add some other tricks that I have learned from creating other animatics with different effects. But I want to be upfront that I've had no formal training in animation or motion design. I was actually an illustration major, so although I might not know the traditional or professional ways to go about these techniques, this is how I go about making my illustrations a bit more immersive. I initially did this for my social media posts, but that resulted in me getting actually hired to do this professionally on and off for different jobs throughout the years. So even though I still am not sure if this is the proper way to do things, however, my clients haven't seemed to mind thus far. And it was a way for me to fuse my love of animation with my illustration work. Anything to make our monkey brains go, it move. Unlike traditional frame animation, animatics can be less straightforward. Obviously, we all know how 2D animation works. You draw one frame, then you draw the next, and then the next, and then after a while, you see something in motion. It's just a compilation of individual drawings. That takes a much different skill set that most illustrators just aren't honing. So although creating animatics like this is a little less straightforward, it takes less formal skills and might be a little easier to jump straight into. For the purposes of this video, I will be working in Procreate as I find it very accessible and it's what I'm comfortable in. But feel free to use any program that you're comfortable in as long as you can separate your layers. But first things first, we have to create the image. So let's get to drawing/painting. Create your questionable line work, block in your colors, whatever your process is totally acceptable here. We're not focusing on technique in this video. The more important thing is to have a game plan. Know what parts you want in motion at the end of this result, and make sure those layers are separated. I'll have the speed paint playing in the background just so you can see my painting process, but once I'm finished, I'll export all my layers and assets separately and move over to Final Cut Pro, as that's the video editing program that I prefer, but you can use anything as long as the program allows you to set keyframes. After Effects, Premiere Pro, DaVinci, CapCut. Again, I find Procreate and Final Cut Pro very newbie friendly, very accessible, really easy to learn without any prior skills. So that's what I use because I'm dumb. And I'm coming at this more from an illustration background. And I know a lot of people in that space aren't familiar with video editing programs, so I wanted to keep this very simple. And I think one of the most important things here early on is just kind of having a game plan on knowing what parts you want to move and making sure those are separated. So for this animatic, I wanted an astrology theme where this window cutout frame situation in the background had moving elements, cloud layers, star layers, sheep layers, formatted like a clock. This piece was actually inspired by one of my wife's characters. We kind of did a trade-off where she did a piece with one of my characters in it and I did this piece with one of her characters in it. So shout out to her. Now that you've seen 30 hours compressed into about 2 minutes, let's separate these layers and see what we're working with. I'm also adding this perfect circle to any of the animation frames that are behind the window. That way I can kind of anchor them all to each other and make sure that they're perfectly aligned the way I want. It also will help with rotation later. It's mostly just a starting guide to help me not mess anything up as I go. Now, the majority of motion coming from this animatic are individual layers moving around a center point like a clock, stacked on top of each other, some moving clockwise, some moving counterclockwise. This is extremely easy to do in most programs. Hell, you could physically spin something in Procreate or Photoshop or Clip Studio Paint or whatever just to see kind of the motion that's going to happen. Once you've imported your assets into whatever video program you're using, you're going to want to set keyframes to make it do this automatically. And this goes for most movement. And what keyframes do is it will save the edits at a very specific point within your timeline. So for this, we're at the beginning of our animation. So we're going to go over to rotation. We're going to see that it is set to 0 degrees on rotation, which is great. And then we're going to set the keyframe. So by clicking this, it'll turn yellow and we know that edit is saved on the timeline. If you don't set a keyframe and you make an edit, it will change the entire clip to that edit, not just that specific point on the timeline. Then we are going to move the playhead to 8 seconds. This can be any amount of time, whatever you feel is best. So right there, 8 seconds. And then we are going to set the rotation to 360 degrees and then also set the keyframe. So now it should do a gradual rotation from 0 to 360, doing a full rotation within the span of 8 seconds. And if you wanted to loop that, we'll cut this. We'll actually get rid of the rest. I will copy and then I will paste that repeatedly. So now we have a full rotation looping every 8 seconds. At this point, we can turn on our window layer just to check to make sure everything is lining up as intended. Once that looks good, we can start adding our keyframes to get all the rotation layers complete. Some of these I will have going counterclockwise and some I will have going clockwise just to spice it up a bit and add a bit of variety. I will also time my rotations a bit differently from each other just to give this pseudo parallaxing effect. Like our first cloud layer will do 4 rotations in the span of 20 seconds, but our second cloud layer might do 3 rotations in the span of 20 seconds. That way they're moving at different rates and still do a full, complete, perfect loop by the end of the entire animation. So now that all of our rotating elements are complete, let's move on. You can add keyframes to almost any action. Positioning, you can move something left to right. You can make something hop. You can make something do a little twirl. You can add it to opacity. Frog invisible, frog not invisible. High level stuff here. Now that we're a keyframe master, the only part of this entire thing that is true frame animation is actually the moon. But it's also the simplest and laziest form of frame animation. The moon started off as one painting, where I duplicated the layer and then shifted the color and darkened it. The way I made the moon phases after that was actually erasing into the painting, erasing a bit more, making another layer, erasing a bit more, creating another layer, and then subsequently until the entire moon cycle was done to do a full rotation. Anything to avoid real work, unlike everything else which is physical moving assets that don't actually change frame at all. I think this is a good time to talk about the animation assist feature within Procreate. So the way that animation works within Procreate is that it treats every layer as one frame in the animation. So if you export this as a movie file, each one of these layers will be a frame in that video. But Procreate gives us a couple extra features than just that. So if you're doing something simple, you don't have to use a more complicated program. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up to this wrench up here. We're going to hit canvas and then we're going to turn on animation assist right here. So what this does is it gives you a playhead here at the bottom. And if you set these up chronologically, you can do simple frame animation. But we have a couple more features than that. And also keep in mind, any of the layers that are off will not show up in the animation, and any layers that are on will. And if you group layers together, that folder will show up as one frame within the animation. Additionally, you can set a background frame and a foreground frame within Procreate Animation Assist. And what that does, it will keep those frames on for the entire length of the animation. So we're going to turn on this moon frame here. I'm going to set it to background. And now when I hit play, that dark side of the moon will be in every frame. If you hit settings, you'll see that you have a lot more options. Most importantly, onion skins. If you're actively working on the animation and you need to see the layer below or above the one that you're currently creating. But once you think everything looks good and you're ready to export it, we'll go back up to the wrench, we'll hit share, and what you'll see down here at share layers is a couple options that are useful to us. There's animated GIF, which will dunk the quality. There's animated ping and there's animated MP4. So animated MP4 is just a video file. It will bake the image into the file and you'll get a black background. For the purposes of what we're doing here, I want the transparent background, so I'm going to go with animated ping, which will also keep the quality of the painting, unlike animated GIF. So let's click on that. You'll see the option for transparent background, which is great. And then you'll also see frames per second. A really convenient thing about Procreate is you can set timing to your animations without having to manually add extra frames. So let's say we want to really speed this up. So maybe we would set this to 30 frames per second. And what that is going to do is make this play really quickly over and over. I think that's too fast, so let's move it down to, say, 6 frames per second, because I kind of like that choppy, drawn look. And that's a lot closer to what I'm looking for. So once I'm happy with that, I'll hit the checkbox, and then it'll begin exporting. And once that's exported, I'm going to send this file over to Final Cut Pro so I can construct it with the rest of my animation, as this is only one of the assets for our entire illustration. Not that you couldn't do a complete animation this way, especially if you're doing traditional frame by frame animation. I also added a clipping mask to one of the star charts so that it had a dark side and a light side to kind of mimic the phases of the moon or give this pseudo lighting effect For this, we kept this color gradient, which is going to be our mask layer, stagnant, and we added the rotation to the star chart. That way, as the star chart moved, the lighting looked like it was staying in the same place as the elements of the star chart moved through it. You can add a masking layer very similarly to any of the painting programs in Final Cut Pro, and I'm sure all of the other video programs as well. In Final Cut, you can find these options in the effects library under Image Mask. And we're not done yet, just a couple more little details. Adding one last rotational object to the framework right under the frog detailing, and then adding some flickering stars to the wand. This is just the same 4 stars painted over and over, moved around, turned off and on in a random pattern. And for this illustration, that's about all it entails. But what other things can you do to make animatics? Then don't just revolve around rotating layers around and around and around and around, and then around the other way and then around. Let's explore. Now, I'm not sure what the official term for this is, but I always call it foliage jitter or image jitter. It's definitely an aesthetic that is associated with like old handheld gaming. It can be described as elements of an image moving back and forth. So like the leaves on a plant, the lanterns in the sky. These will move a couple frames one way and a couple frames the other way back and forth. It makes the scene look a bit more lively. It's extremely simple to do with only 2 or 3 frames. Or this lightning effect on this piece that I created. It's literally one overlay layer turned off and on repeatedly in attempts to line up with the sound effects. You don't need to overcomplicate things to get started. Even this floating potion cart is just created with keyframes, so things are moving up and down or left and right. The doors themselves are just a separate layer. Shadow layer is being turned on as the doors close. There are so many possibilities. Obviously, you can make these as complex as you want and really get out of hand with things. But I think these techniques are a good starting point that add a lot of value to an image. If you found this video helpful at all and would like more like this, please like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments down below if there's any other types of tutorials you would like to see. I've been trying to keep most of my tutorials very basic, but if you would like me to go into more complex techniques, let me know. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
It's coming to a close. I guess I should know that I'm never gonna see you again in a place that sells vintage clothes. I guess you should know that it hasn't been the easiest years for a band of living in the throes. And then I see a smile between repetitive aisles of flannel shirts, and I thought you would show like a beautiful ghost caught in a saving throw.